World peace has never been easy. The path to peace in a male-dominated world has always been a difficult battle, and the biggest victims have been children and women. In 1992, Women's Federation for World Peace took a historic step on the path towards world peace and towards changing the world through maternal love.
세계 평화 여성 연합 운동은 여성만을 위한 운동이 아닙니다. 이상적 가정들이 모여서 이상적인 국가, 이상적인 세계를 이루게 되는 것입니다.
WFWP has partnered with the United Nations, governments, and civil society in all parts of the world. From 1992, in 119 countries, Women's Federation for World Peace members have organized programs aimed at transforming this world into a world of peace. We have provided literacy, vocational, and public health education to foster women's independence. We have carried out family values and sex education programs, seminars on marriage, education for parents, and family counseling to build peaceful families. We have held programs for women, including leadership education, peace conferences, and peace academies to develop women's leadership. And we have organized sisterhood ceremonies to promote reconciliation and heal historical resentment and hatred. And thanks to the partnerships with governments and numerous organizations, these efforts have brought true progress. More than 35,000 women and girls received education that helped them to become financially independent. More than 327,000 women and girls received education for building peaceful families. More than 360,000 women and girls received leadership training to empower and elevate their status in society. And more than 160,000 women have participated in sisterhood ceremonies to reconcile historical resentment and hatred. Women's rights have greatly improved over the past 30 years, but even where there has been progress, it is not enough, and tremendous challenges still remain in many, many countries. COVID-19 reveals huge global inequalities. Wars and conflicts continue, and the threat of climate change is still getting worse. Women and girls are the most vulnerable in these crises. But women have special qualities of empathy, caring, solidarity, and love. With these qualities, women and girls must take a bold step forward to take on the unfinished business of creating a lasting world of peace. Historically, world peace has never come easy, but for 30 years, through the maternal love of women, we have worked to create a more peaceful world and will continue to do so until peace can be and is a reality for all.
네, 여러분 안녕하세요.
Hello everyone, welcome. I sincerely thank everyone for attending the GWPN webinar hosted by the WFWP Korea, Japan, and the United States. Today's theme is Women's Leadership, Reconciliation, and Peacemaking, a unified Korea rising above challenges. I am Moriko Hori, President of WFWP Japan. I look forward to your kind cooperation. WFWP has been hosting webinars as a series so far. We have practiced peace movements all over the world, exploring how women can contribute to reconciliation and peace. The main topic we are going to deal with today is peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Korea is in a very important geopolitical position. The situation surrounding unification of this peninsula is very serious and difficult. Today, subtopic is how to transcend the challenges and hardships surrounding reconciliation and unification. There are numerous difficulties in the process of reconciliation and peace building. I think the issue of unification on the Korean Peninsula is a joint task not only for East Asia, but also for the international community. Today will be a time to listen to actual stories of North Korean defectors and Korean Japanese overcoming difficulties to work towards reconciliation and reunification. And we have a special guest speaker from Germany. The first step in reconciliation understanding. There can be many perspectives due to the various requirements. It is very important to recognize the difference. I think those who attend today are those who want unification and harmony of the Korean Peninsula more than anyone else. I hope this webinar will be an opportunity to break your stereotypes and promote mutual understanding. Before starting the webinar, Dr. Julianne Moon will give a welcoming
women
speech.
leaders,
Woman
panelists,
leader,
friends from near and far,
friends.
ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good evening. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 오하요 고자이마스. 네. It is my great honor to welcome all the distinguished panelists and attendees at the second virtual forum of the Global Women's Peace Network, a project of Women's Federation for World Peace, on the topic of a unified Korea rising above challenges. On behalf of the co-founder of WFWP, Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon, I would like to thank members from Japan, Korea, and the United States for organizing and making today's event possible. While many people are skeptical about the possibility of a peaceful reunification on the Korean Peninsula, Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon has absolute faith and determination that it can and must be done. She and her late husband, Reverend Dr. Sun Myung-moon, have taught that unity between divided peoples require rising above differences of politics, ideology, and even religion, and respecting one another as members of the same human family. This is truly humanity's biggest challenge. Father and Mother Moon, as they are known throughout the world, were born in what is now North Korea, and they never stopped for one moment to work for reunification. Father Moon was imprisoned by communist authorities during the Korean War, and he spent 2 years at Hungnam Prison, liberated by UN forces the day before his execution. When she was just a little girl, Mother Moon's family escaped to the south to seek religious and personal freedom. Today's forum is especially meaningful because it marks the 30th anniversary of our founder's historic meeting with former chairman Kim Il-sung in Pyongyang on November 30th, 1991. That meeting was no less than a miracle. Well known for their worldwide victory over communism efforts, Father and Mother Moon traveled to their homeland, unsure of their own personal safety. Risking his life, Father Moon spoke out strongly to the leaders of the North Korean regime, saying that they must abandon communism and become a God-centered nation. Despite the unspeakable suffering he endured due to communism, Father Moon abandoned all resentment and embraced Chairman Kim as a brother. Sharing their love of Korean food and culture, they formed a personal bond of heart. After returning home, our founders initiated several economic projects to help the people of North Korea, including the ongoing 1% Love Share project of WFWP. This historical meeting was also the catalyst for opening the doors of exchange between the two governments of North and South Korea. Father and Mother Moon indeed showed by example what it means to rise above challenges. 6 months after that historic meeting in April 1992, they founded the Women's Federation for World Peace, which gained general consultative status with the United Nations in 1997. Mother Moon made several speaking tours throughout the world to speak about the new era of women. It is time, she said, to tap into the loving power of women who can lead the way to a healthier, safer world for future generations. WFWP also initiated the Bridge of Peace, a simple ceremony during which women representing former enemy nations, ethnicities, and religions would overcome historical resentments to cross the bridge of peace and embrace the other as sisters. Some may wonder why the unification of Korea is so important. Mother Moon feels a great sense of urgency to bring an end to separation on the peninsula, not only for the betterment of North Korea and its people, but also for the sake of peace in the Asia-Pacific region. Her vision and dream are to establish a God-centered, unified Korea that can lead Asia and the world to a peace as a model nation. Knowing that peace on the Korean Peninsula requires support and consensus of the international community, Mother Moon has initiated gatherings of world leaders through what is called Think Tank 2022, with the hopes of holding a peace summit in North Korea. As a daughter-in-law, I'm truly amazed at her bold leadership and her unrelenting determination. In every gathering, whether small or large, Mother Moon speaks of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. Principles inherited from God are one common creator. She emphasizes the need for individuals as well as nations to overcome self-centeredness and care for others as part of one global family. The future of Korean unification must reach beyond the efforts of official government entities and tap into the power of people-to-people diplomacy. That power can only be found within the heart of love for one another, which can never be forced. It will take a great deal of open communication, education, and sharing for unification to become a reality, and is the reason for this webinar today. The unity and collaboration of Korea, Japan, and the United States are vital to achieving peace on the peninsula, which is why I feel this webinar today is so very important. I'm sure today's distinguished panelists will be offering fresh and helpful perspectives on how to approach the future reunification of Korea. I thank each of you on this panel today for your time and sincere efforts. You are truly contributing to the effort to rise above challenges. God bless you, your families, and your nations. Thank you very much.
네, 문은숙 회장님.
Thank you for your touching words, President Julian Moon.
30년 전
I cannot hide my surprise that 30 years ago on this day, Dr. Sun Myung-moon and Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon had visited North Korea and had a historical meeting with late Chairman Kim Il-sung. Through your words, you have shown us a great vision that peace on the Korean Peninsula will be the starting point of world peace. Next, Angelica Selly, President of WFWP USA, will give an introductory remark.
Good evening, good morning, distinguished women leaders, panelists, participants from Korea, Japan, and the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, it's also my honor to welcome you to this second session of our virtual Global Women Peace Network series. As you know, in our previous Global Women Peace Network forum on August 27th, we spoke about finding seeds of hope for unified Korea. and we were deeply moved and enlightened to hear from panelists of North Korean descent who now live in North Korea, or in Korea, Japan, and the United States, who shared their compelling stories and insights on this topic. Today, we will turn our attention to various challenges both North and South Koreans are and will be facing before and after the reunification, and what it will take to rise above these challenges. Our planning committee carefully selected 4 distinguished panelists who will address this topic from their own unique perspective and will leave us with concrete suggestions for possible solutions based on each person's field and background of involvement. Based on popular demand, stemming from our previous event as well, we will also hear more about the Teson School and University located in Japan, with its unique vision of a unified Korea. There was also a request, as mentioned, to invite a speaker from Germany, which once was a country divided between the Eastern Soviet bloc and the Western Democratic bloc, and which is now a reunified nation. We felt it might be valuable to learn what kinds of challenges Germany faced before and after the unification, and what elements played a role in overcoming them. Germany happens to be my land of origin as well, and I still remember deeply what it felt like to see the Berlin Wall and to live in a tragically divided nation. So before we call on the panelists, I would like to briefly introduce the Global Women Peace Network. It is a project of Women's Federation International, and it brings together NGOs, decision makers, leaders, organizations, and governments to solve pressing social issues through peace leadership based on feminine aspect of human nature. And like Women's Federation, it is non-political, non-partisan, non-sectarian, yet it is rooted in universal values and spiritual principles. Its founding vision, as was mentioned, is to achieve one global family and community under God and the world of lasting peace. Undergirding the Women's Federation and the GWPN is the simple philosophy of living for the sake of others, motivated by a motherly and parental heart. It is simple in concept, but not easy to practice in a world governed by selfishness and greed. Therefore, the founders felt, as President said, that in order for peace to become a reality, women need to play a more pivotal role. In the words of Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon herself, she says, quote, "Women have the magical power to create harmony and to soften hearts. Brides build bridges. The world of the future is a world of reconciliation and peace, but only if it is based on a maternal love and affection of women," end quote. I would like to also add that women and mothers are natural problem solvers, and together in harmony and partnership with our men, we will be able to bring about a turning point for the better and for peace. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we now look forward very much to hear from our esteemed panelists. Thank you very much.
네, 안게리카 회장님, 개회사 감사드리겠습니다.
President Angelica Sally, thank you for your introductory remarks. You said that GWPN's founding vision is to create one global family under God and achieve a world of continuous peace. You delivered a strong message that the driving force is the women's love, service, and sacrifice. Yes, then let's bring out our first speaker of the day. Our first speaker is Director Ryu Youn Kwon. Ms. Kwon was born in North Korea and defected to South Korea in 1997. She created after-school classes for teenage North Korean defectors. Ms. Kwon is working very hard every day for North Korean defectors to adapt in South Korea. Hello everyone, I'm the defector from North Korea. There are 2 main conditions in defection. First, economic difficulties, and second, political difficulties. For me, both of my parents are from South Korea. They were sent to the North during the Korean War. I was born as the youngest out of 3 sons and 2 daughters. I was raised with warm love from both my parents. However, since 1994, my family went through a hard time due to the death of Chairman Kim Il-sung. After his death, all borders were shut down, so did the smuggling path that kept our family fed. My brother also smuggled food to feed his family. One day, ahead of his daughter's birthday, he went to China, but right after he left, the borders were blocked due to Kim Il-sung's sudden death. Oh, when he returned to North Korea, he had his wrists tied up and was dragged by a truck. The authorities then took them all around and showed everyone the consequences of betraying the country. Everyone was in fear and was horrified having to watch the blood-covered appearance of my brother. There was and still is no human rights and freedom in North Korea. Although my brother was innocent, he was sent to the political prison camp just because the period of his journey to China was similar to Chairman Kim Il-sung's death. Even though my brother was victimized, the reality is that there was no one nor nowhere to go for help. From this incident, my father passed away from a stroke, and my mother passed away after suffering from anxiety. Our family was destroyed. It was hell for my siblings and I to go out into society and work every day with such pain. When I went to work, they would mention my brother every morning meeting and at every weekly assembly. I could not avoid the looks on my coworkers' faces. It was one moment our family was honored for being the model family to being destroyed and ruined. I still feel sorry when thinking of my parents. They passed away not being able to return to their hometown with 6 children left and being betrayed by their country. Two years later, I went through another hard time. I suffered government suppression because of my older brother and his son's defection from North Korea. I was beat up if I told them I didn't know about what happened. For 3 months of investigation, I had to write 100 pages of self-criticism and an apology letter saying these things would not be repeated. I couldn't understand why my brother's defection became a crime against me. However, in North Korea, there is no excuse for obedience. I had no choice but to follow without saying a word. It was hard for me to live in a society where I had no family left with me and I was politically criticized constantly. I began to wonder why my brothers risked their lives to criticize the society and leave the country. What the society was like where my brother left to, and what kind of society my parents tell me. I started to think of myself going there too. The least I wanted was to live like a human being, and so my journey to find freedom and hope started. After losing both my parents and living alone in a difficult environment with harsh torture, I escaped to China on November 1997. My older brother and his son were already in China. I met my brother there, but we parted ways shortly. After going separate ways, I couldn't relax under the fear of being caught. Every morning, I would hear that fellow defectors were caught. Hearing such news would terrify me. especially reminding me of the time my brother was dragged around. Every night I would listen to the Korean radio. I would fall asleep missing my family and my parents' hometown I had never been to. After 4 years, I was able to hear good news that my brother was looking for me. Thanks to this, I got in touch with my brother and I was able to come to my parents' hometown that I dreamed of, South Korea. I thought everything could be resolved if I could make it to South Korea, but everything was different from what I expected. First, the culture was severely different, and second, despite speaking the same language, it was hard to communicate. Although everything was unfamiliar, I tried to learn and overcome it by thinking I had started life again. Another life began in South Korea. I got married and gave birth to my child. From the same point of being a parent, I wanted to raise my child to become a great person without any trouble. Living in South Korean society was a road of endless bumps. When I tried opening a business, I failed. There's nothing I haven't tried to make a living. Being exhausted, I would go to church and pray very hard and participated in many volunteer programs. The only thing that came back to me was being heartbroken. I put in much effort to not show my hardship to my child. However, my child was being discriminated against because of language and cultural differences. My child would get bullied by his friends and their parents because he was a child of a North Korean defector. Every time I hear this, I felt like my heart would stop. It was okay for me to go through hardship, but it was difficult to me see my child being in pain. In order to overcome cultural and language differences, I changed my perspective of the world, found my own values, studied hard, and attended college, and became a social worker. I lived and worked very hard. I became a successful mother who many people envied and was not ignored. For any reason, it was and still is not easy to overcome cultural differences and start a life in an unfamiliar capitalist society. People who have not experienced how hard it is to live a new life and the pain from a country's division will not be able to imagine the difficulties. No matter what you do or what kind of business you do, don't live a life of regret. Abandon your greed and ambition and heal other people's wounds with a warm heart. When we do, I think our lives can change due to the butterfly effects. There were so many things that mothers do while raising children, but I think the most important thing was to communicate and teach them. All subjects, including Korean and English, were so different from what I had learned. I wanted to do anything for the future of my child. I volunteered to help at a native English class, and as a result, I learned that not only my child, but also many North Korean defectors and their children were having a hard time as well. They were bullied for not being able to catch up in class. I had a desire to serve such defectors to settle well in the Korean society and have children grow up to fight for unification. I'm currently conducting volunteer work such as counseling North Korean defectors to settle in the South Korean society well, so that North Korean refugee youth can come to South Korea and adapt well, so that their children do not go through what my child had. And for the elderly who live alone, I had a hard time due to many reasons, but I learned that I could overcome anything if I overcome my difficulties. Apart from counseling and opening various projects, I provide after-school classes for subjects students have to take at school. Such classes are Korean language, math, science, social studies, and English. These classes are open to anyone who desires to learn, but especially to teenage defectors. 13 years have passed since the establishment of the Kunsam after-school class as a corporation of the Ministry of Unification, and many changes have occurred to students. Although the journey was hard, the students thought of their parents and looked back on them. They overcame it and entered college to study towards their dreams. They also come back to Kunsam after-school classes to volunteer. As a citizen of South Korea who has the ability and attitude to understand and adapt to the era of unification on the Korean Peninsula and seek mutual exchange and development of an integrated society. I think it is our mission to achieve unification that has not yet been achieved. We will do our best to educate more North Korean defectors and students. Kunsam received notice that our organization would be cancelled from the Ministry of Unification for being accused of sending North Korea goods and distributing flyers that praise North Korea. However, we won the lawsuit and were able to resume our activities. The corporation was cancelled due to sanctions by the current government and the Ministry of Unification, taking issue of human rights activities done by Kunsam with the current government's policy toward North Korea and Kim Yo-jong's subordination law. The Ministry of Unification cut off sponsorship for students' educational project for 2 years because of the cancellation of the corporation. It was difficult because we could not put students' education to a stop. We have been doing it steadily so far and will continue to do so. Education cannot be stopped, and I cannot stop volunteering. We'll do our best to educate more North Korean defectors and students, and we will continue to work hard without stopping until the day of reunification, or even after unification. WFWP has been a great help to children's education by providing steady support for the past 6 years. Thank you so much. I would appreciate it if you could see us with lots of interest and warm love. Thank you, Director Ryu Youn Kwon. Through your speech, we could see the lives of North Koreans who have defected and the difficulties they are struggling with. It is also a reality that we will have to face when the two Koreas reunify. Such experiences of pioneers like you have been giving us a lot of messages. Now we'd like to invite the second panel of the day. But before we invite the second speaker, let me briefly explain the word Korean-Japanese. Many people think that Korean-Japanese are divided into two ethnicity groups, Mindan and Jocheonryun. Mindan usually refers to Koreans who belong to the south of the Korean Peninsula, and the Jocheonryun refers to those who belong to the north. However, today's two panelists argue that this distinction is one of the reasons Korean-Japanese people are being divided. They refer to Korean-Japanese as one ethnicity group living in Japan. And let's bring out our second speaker today. Iida Koji is the representative of a nonprofit organization, Uri Hana. Representative Koji is a Japanese person, yet an adopted son of a Korean-Japanese family. Currently, as a representative of Urihana, he works hard to achieve reunification of North and South Korea and reconciliation of Korean-Japanese people. Representative Koji has been recognized for his activities and is currently working as a boxing coach at Chosun University. Nice to meet you. I'm Iida Koji, the representative director of Urihana. Urihana is a nonprofit organization that aims to serve as a bridge between the Korean Peninsula and Japan. What we do, Urihana provides opportunities for Japanese and Korean Japanese to meet. We also provide activities to create friendship between them by understanding one another. Many Korean Japanese people live in uncomfortable situations. It is our duty to understand their difficulties and improve their situations. While cooperating with many Korean Japanese, I was convinced to build a community for the sake of others. This was the motive behind to establish Urihana. So we think the field work is very important.
そこで日本による朝鮮半島の植民地支配の歴史に触れました。その衝撃は少年だった私にはあまりにも大きく。
So we have lectures and education and field work and communication. We have a cooperation with Korean Japanese organization. We make events and we support Joseon schools.
20代ではプロボクシングの選手になり、試合用のトランクスには朝鮮半島平和統一の願いを込めて南北統一という文字を掲げて。
In my 20s, I was a professional boxer. I fought in the rings wearing match pants that said South-North unification. It was my way of showing desire for peaceful reunification on the Korean Peninsula. The income I received was donated to the Chosun schools. I am currently a boxing coach at Chosun University. One day, a Korean Japanese person found out about my activities and told me he wanted to adopt me. Today, I am an adopted son of a Korean Japanese. Through my adoptive father, I heard about the history and agony of Korean Japanese people. My adoptive father is a second-generation Korean Japanese born in Japan. Even though he was treated differently, as a Korean, he graduated from a famous university in Japan and revisited his long-cherished homeland, Korea. One day, while teaching at a university, he was caught in violation of the National Security Act and imprisoned for 10 years. The crime was that he was spying and leaking South Korean information to North Korea. My father was imprisoned for 10 years. Only one time he went to North Korea to meet his older sister through a government project for the separated families that got him imprisoned. For the next 40 years, he suffered a lot under the stigma of being a spy. After being acquitted in 2012, the first thing my father said was, "Hooray to South Korea." He was betrayed by his country, yet told me he couldn't hate his country. My father always says, "You have to abandon your resentments." He doesn't have any resentment towards Japan, who ruled and drove his country into division, and the Korean government who betrayed him. Instead, he was determined to devote the rest of his life to reunifying the two Koreas and improving the relationship between Korea and Japan. One way we could achieve this was by adopting me. a Japanese person as his son. Likewise, I will devote my life to improving the relations between South, North Korea, and Japan, and the reunification of North and South Korea. I'm currently a representative of an organization, Uri Hana, which supports, enlightens, and recruits the South Korean Japanese society. I work with many Japanese, Koreans, and Korean Japanese people who share similar values. Japan was in a position to be divided after the defeat during World War II. However, the Korean Peninsula, which was dominated by Japan, was divided instead. Due to this division, countless families were separated and are still unable to meet until this day. More than 30 countries participated in the Korean War in 1950. The number of bombs dropped on the Korean Peninsula during the Korean War is said to be higher than the number of bombs dropped around the world during World War II. The Korean Peninsula became the site of a proxy war between communism and democracy. The situation of division has been going on for more than 70 years. We need to know that a small peninsula in East Asia has continued to carry the World War until today. Isn't the division of the South Korea and North Korea an international issue involving many countries? During the Korean War, Koreans fought against each other on behalf of the world. At the forefront of the war, families and friends were killing each other. The ceasefire continued after being divided by the Three-Eight Line and separated by land and family. Wouldn't it be a stain and a disgrace to the world that the Korean people are left in such a conflict? I think those who are participating in this webinar today are at least instead interested in the Korean Peninsula issue. Should we do our best to solve this absurd situation? The cause of this division of Korea began during the Japanese colonial period. As a Japanese, I will cooperate as much as possible toward the peaceful unification of Korea. However, Japan alone cannot achieve the unification of Korea. I think this problem must be solved through cooperation between people from all over the world. We tend to embody historical problems as political issues for people living in Korea and overseas. The division of Korea is an ongoing family problem. Family refers to a relationship formed by love. Peaceful reunification on Korea cannot be achieved without love from all over the world. There are 7 million people in the world, knowing more than anyone else the sorrows of family love scattered by the tragedy of a country division. Koreans live around the world, including China, Japan, Russia, Vietnam, and Australia. I think overseas Koreans and the international community should do their best to solve these issues together. Many people may not be familiar with the term Korean Japanese. Perhaps names such as Mindan and Chongnyeon are more familiar. However, I'm not deliberately using the name Mindan or Chochongnyeon. The Korean Peninsula was divided into Mindan and Chongnyeon through historical, political, and ideological circumstances. There are many Korean Japanese living in Japan. Some of them settled in Japan before the war, or some of them were brought because of labor. I'd like to talk about Korean Japanese as a person who works with them. There are 7 million Koreans who live outside of Korea and about 800,000 live in Japan. Korean Japanese live in many complicated situations. including problems regarding nationality, rights, discrimination, and confrontation with ideology. There are especially negative perceptions of Korean Japanese people with Korean nationalities. Japanese people would wait to use abusive words to students attending Joseon school. As a Japanese person, I think this should not be happening. After Japan's defeat in World War II, the Korean Peninsula became independent and liberated from Japanese colonial rule. And immediately after liberation, they faced the division of their country and family separation. The weakened country had to suffer again as the battlefield of the greater countries, and until this day, not only Koreans in Korea, but Korean Japanese people have been suffering for more than 70 years. Korean Japanese people, especially those who have experienced Korea before the division, are the key to achieving peaceful reunification with an Whenever I went in Japan, I would meet many Korean Japanese who longed for the two Koreas to reunify. In other words, desired a day for separated families to come together as one. Many Korean Japanese are also living witnesses who have endured with the power of family love while living a miserable life in Japan, hoping for the independence and reunification of their country. To these people, South Korea is their home, North Korea is where their relatives live, and Japan is their parents who have raised them. These Korean Japanese people have seen both the inside and outside of the three countries. In this sense, it would not be an exaggeration to say that the key to unification on the Korean Peninsula is held by the Korean Japanese. There are up to 160 memorial monuments for victims of the Korean War across Japan. These memorial stones were put together by those who prayed for reconciliation and peace between Japan and Korea. I go to sites where Joseon people were forced arrested or the old coal mines they were sent to work. Currently, I hold events to commemorate those who passed away. There are some people who have been working for decades to commemorate those who have lost their lives unfairly. I think you know the story of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who cut Koreans' noses and ears and sent them to Japan as evidence of his success during the Japanese invasion of Korea. Some people hold memorial services in front of the monuments. Governments around Japan also hold memorial services for Joseon workers and victims. In order to have Korea and Japan reconcile, we need to know why there are Korean people living in Japan. We also need to know what happened between North, South Korea, and Japan. It is also the purpose of this webinar, but it is important to know first. You cannot start anything without knowing. When I was in my early 20s, I entered the Korean-Japanese community because I wanted to be close to Korean residents. But I was treated very coldly. They told me to go back and yelled, asking me what Japanese people would know. I was sad to visit because I wanted to be a friend, but I was able to find out that this was the way Korean Japanese were treated in Japanese society. In Japanese society, if a Korean Japanese person were to say, my last name is Lee, Kim, or Park, Japanese people would say, why are these Koreans here? Go back to Joseon or Korea. I could not stop my tears when I felt what it was like to be treated as a Korean living in Japan. Like this, if you do not know, you cannot start anything. I learned that even if I wanted to love Korean Japanese people, there were things that could hurt them because of my own ignorance. Through many experiences, I learned that knowing is a prerequisite for the reconciliation of both Korea and Japan. If you don't know, there can be a start, and no matter how long time passes, you cannot reach the end point. Through this webinar, I would like to end my story with the sincere hope that many people will pay attention to Korea and their divided pain and recognize that they still live in pain. Please listen to their silent sounds and help move toward unification. Thank you, Representative Iida Koji. Your story and experience was a big shock to us. Being born as a Japanese, becoming an adopted son of a Korean-Japanese family, working for the unification of the two Koreas and harmony for Korean-Japanese people. You must have touched the hearts of many people. Thank you so much. Let's bring out our third speaker. Teson Chon is a third-generation Korean-Japanese born in Japan. From elementary school to high school, he attended a Joseon school in Japan. Even after graduating from Joseon school, he is doing a lot of activities in hopes of unification between the two Koreas. In particular, he is actively promoting and enlightening activities to support Joseon schools. Today, he will tell us about experiences as a Korean Japanese that many people know about. Hello everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Teson Chon. Today I'd like to talk under the title Unification of North and South Korea with Joseon Schools. My mother's grandfather is from Pyeongnam district. It was in the northern part of Joseon Peninsula before the division, known as North Korea. He came to Japan during the Japanese occupation and has been living as a Korean Japanese first generation. Because of the discrimination against Korean people in Japan, my grandfather had to change his nationality to Japanese. Also, he did not want his children to be discriminated against, so he did not tell them that he was originally from Korea. My mother had not known that until she was 20 years old. My mother didn't understand why her family had to hide the fact that they were Korean, why they had to lose their country, language, family, and name to become Japanese. She then thought of a way for them to live as a proud Korean. The method she found was Joseon schools. Students at Joseon schools have confidence and pride in being from Korea. My mother would say it was beautiful to see students being able to love their language and culture in a foreign country. After a while, as if the wishes of my ancestors had come true, I, as a third-generation Korean Japanese, was able to attend the Joseon school. I attended a Joseon school for a total of 9 years. Attending a Joseon school for elementary and middle school, I was able to grow under family and country love from teachers, friends, and parents. It was not until me, the third generation, that my mother and grandfather were finally able to regain their lost country and identity. Then what kind of school is a Joseon school? At Joseon schools, students learn Korean literature and develop their identity as a Joseon person through learning Joseon geography, Joseon history, Joseon dance and music. All classes and communication within teachers and students are all conducted in Korean. Even someone who doesn't know Korean at all can talk fluently after a year or two. Girls wear hanbok uniforms and take classes. In the past, we wear jagori to and from school. Joseon schools are the only schools in Japan that have been conducting ethnicity education. For those of us who try following the tradition and culture of our country, we think of Joseon schools as a lifeline. Teachers, students, and parents help each other to form a large family. Joseon schools became the center of love for the Korean Japanese community. It is a community that teaches us love, a home we should return to, and our home of our hearts. It is our hometown where our heart belongs. That is why we call such Joseon schools our school with such affection. Thanks to Joseon schools, we were able to live proudly without abandoning our identity. And there's another thing that can never be left out when talking about Joseon school. What does it mean that we have preserved the spirit of the nation in Joseon school? Korean Japanese are neither North nor South Koreans. Korean Japanese are descendants of those who came from Korea before it was divided into two countries. Living with a clear identity as Korean from the undivided Korea means that we have a strong desire to regain the country where our ancestors once lived. Our wish is the unification of Korea. Joseon School is a school that provides education on unification and wishes for unification between the two Koreas. For example, during Sports Day, we raise a unification flag. Also, we learn a lot of music and dances and mourn division and pray for unification. Students draw and write poems that wish for unification. I will introduce a poem written by a chosen school student, The Long-Awaited Reunification of My Country. How long will the reunification of my country take? Will it be in a year or three, or maybe in a distant future? It is so great that our hometown, our country will become one. It feels like I've taken all the joy in the world. All I can hear is good news that the North and South have become one. I'm so happy. Every Joseon person is excited. Joseon, a bad country. I cannot forget what I would hear on the TV. I was surprised, sad, and heartbroken. My mom told me that Joseon was a good country. I have learned that Joseon was a kind country, but I do not know why people are saying bad things. When my country is unified, the sadness of separated families will be gone. There will be no war, and the relationship between Korea and the United States and Japan will be resolved. Then no one will say anything bad about my country. Oh, my country I miss. I wonder how great it will be when we become one. People from all over the world will come and find only good things about our country. The whole world will be surprised. Will it be in a year or three, or perhaps tomorrow? When our country becomes one, I will be the first to run with my family and relatives. Oh, I look forward to the reunification of my country. They are just students who purely want the reunification of country. But it is a matter of discrimination that they stick to them like shadows. In my experience, on my way back to and from school, I was often abused or bullied by Japanese adults on the subway or bus. There was also a case where my friend was hit by a baseball bat at a train station. Also, classes were often dismissed because right-wing Japanese people would give hate speeches through loudspeakers. At first, listening to these hate speeches were scary. However, as time passed, you would get used to it and feel nothing. In addition, discrimination against Joseon schools such as the subsidy issues reminded us of Japan's policy during the Japanese colonial period. The reality is that 76 years after liberation, we still feel as if we are under Japanese colonization. What I mostly feel when encountering Japanese people is that many people have stereotypes against Chosen schools. There are many people criticizing Chosen school as if they had seen it all just through biased news reports on TV or articles on the internet that do not even have credibility. I think this is a problem that applies not only to Chosen schools, but also to everything. You can only know the true image of a person by actually meeting them and listening to what they have said. Although they are students of chosen school who are fighting against discrimination and prejudice in Japan, even political issues of South Korea, North Korea, and Japan are emerging as issues of chosen schools. Japanese people criticize chosen schools for being anti-Japanese education. South Koreans criticize chosen schools through policies against Japan, and students are hurt whenever North Korea tests missiles. It can be said that the people living at the bottom of the great distortion between the three countries are chosen school students. I'm confident that chosen school students will also be able to feel this big distortion and connect the three countries. Students call South Korea their hometown, North Korea their homeland, and Japan their home country. South Korea, the hometown, is where our grandparents were born. It is the starting point of our ethnicity. Our homeland, North Korea, recognized us as citizens, protected and loved chosen schools. Japan, our home country, is where we were born and raised under our mother's love. Chosen school students can go to the north or south at any time. The students know the deeper truth of the world because we are able to see, know, feel, think, love, and live in South Korea, North Korea, and Japan. Chosen school students are surrounded by three great love and stand with these loves overlapping. I think the closest thing to peace between the Korean Peninsula and Japan are chosen school students. They are children who are living hard to become a bridge of peace that connects the three countries together. In order for them to live proudly, unification between the two Koreas is essential. And they are essential to everyone who desires the two Koreas to unify. If you learn the inner beauty, dignity, and truth of chosen school students that cannot be seen from the outside, the unification of the two Koreas will be just around the corner. First of all, I hope you will pay attention to chosen schools. Please come to visit chosen schools. Students full of love from South North Korea and Japan will be awaiting for you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. There are numerous chosen schools in Japan, and most people lived without knowing about it. Last month, I visited chosen school under the guidance of Teson Chon. I was surprised by the pure appearance of the teachers and students I met there. There were slogans all over the school wishing for the unification of two Koreas. As the word chosen refers to the name of Korea before the division, many people would not have known that it was not only meant for North or South Korea. Please give a big round of applause to Chon Dae-sung for giving us a precious speech. Next is our last speaker of the day. Beatrice Bischof is the director of the German Diplomatic Association. Dr. Bischof is also a TV journalist, political scientist, and writer.
Dear International President, dear Dr. Julia Moon, peace leaders, ladies and gentlemen of the Global Women's Peace Network, I appreciate and enjoy being here today with you, taking part in this important forum on elaborating solutions for reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula. General principles of reconciliation are: the long-term goal of reunification is defined as a constitutional matter, based on a reconciliation with generally accepted rules of coexistence and institutions that provide non-violent conflict resolution and mediation of interests. This requires a systematic transformation of the political system. But to achieve this, additional efforts are needed to establish a social consensus on values and the Constitution. There is where politics of the past, in German Vergangenheitsbewältigung, comes into play. It has three essential tasks to fulfill: reconciliation, restorative justice, and remembrance. At the center of this process is the intention to never let it happen again, which strengthens the common interest for reconciliation and a better future. Are we talking about nation building? Here two currents clash. On one hand, we will find ourselves in a post-national constellation, in which an emerging cosmopolitan world unity suggests that the national references of economic policy and society need to recede into the background. In the case of Korea, as in Germany, constitutional patriotism is called for instead of individual patriotism and pride. In short, this means globalization represses nationalism and the rule of law overrides national and cultural values. But why is so much being done in transition countries, means countries in a state of uncertainty, to create a national identity and a strong national consensus? Reconciliation here means first and foremost an understanding and acknowledging past offenses toward the victims of violence and their suffering. Examples of that are the victims who were shot as they tried to cross over the Iron Curtain, victims of oppression by totalitarian regimes, and so on. Acknowledging these offenses are a precondition for creating a new common ground for unification. Also, a well-constructed political constitution is the determining prerequisite for the success of democratic transformation processes. The basic social consensus based on reconciliation is also pivotal. Germany, for example, has a fractured history, meaning sharply varied political structures and regimes in the national past, which was originally meant to promote self-assurance and national identity, yet became a case and source of conflict. Since the founding of the German Reich, 1871, Germany has experienced 5 regimes and regime changes. The last regime, which overcame the division of Germany from 1949 to 1989, after 40 years of two-state and social orders on German soil and an international social conflict, class conflict, left behind a still existing economic and political segregation. Even after the reunification, certain obstacles existed in connection to economic equality of the people in both German countries, with pensions and loans. The people in the West had to deal with the Soli, which means to provide tax contributions towards the rebuilding of East German economy. The existing German regime can be understood as another new type of regime, most of all because of an ongoing transfer of sovereignty to the European Union. There is hope for the future. This possible political integration, self-identity and self-assurance will be promoted precisely through this kind of social learning processes in dealing with a broken and painful past, as Roland Chada from the University of Osnabrück mentions. Thoughts on practice using the German example. How were the Germans now reunited after the brute division with wall construction, border shots, and almost complete closure, which divided not only citizen communities but also whole families? But before the unification, of course, there were still very limited contacts within the family, as the reunions were difficult and lengthy or even dangerous in case of unauthorized border crossings. But then became the collapse of the SED regime. The people in East Germany rose up. These spirits emanated from the Protestant churches and the assemblies within them. Reunification had to happen virtually overnight. The path that follows was to draft rules externally and internally, the great task of the Kohl government. The important task that followed is not to be underestimated. The rebonding and growing together of Germans who had grown apart from each other in different social systems. What greatly assisted in recreating national identity were several events. The World Cup on German soil, a German Pope, and a federal president from the East who was a Protestant pastor, but not at least also a chancellor who came from the East but was anchored in the Western social system. At the same time, this component called for an increased effort to integrate Germany into Europe, as the Adenauer administration already envisaged for future reunification, a Germany united in Europe. This European anchoring was the precondition for the German reunification. Otherwise, no ally and no European state would have ever accepted the reunification because of the painful historic experience in Germany's past. What lessons can be drawn from this for the Korean Peninsula? An abrupt reunification should be avoided as much as possible, and it is not a question of absorption. The way forward is clearly the establishment of a gradual peace order. It is about integration, not only nationally, but also in the long term into the regional environment. Steps in this direction include economic cooperation in special economic zones, military confidence building measures, including through international bodies such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, non-political exchanges and cooperation projects. Here, the Korean Peninsula can act as a link between the Pacific and the Eurasian continent, in cooperation with neighboring countries, with Russia, strategic partnership, and the United States. In conclusion, what did it take to bring about German unification? First, nation building, recreating a new national identity, and second, integration surrounding countries, in this case with the Asian Pacific region. This will be most effective if done in a step-by-step fashion. This also applies to the formation of a monetary union, for instance. Again, how can the new national identity be created? For example, joint sporting events, we remember Pyeongchang Olympics, economic cooperation as in special economic zones, and through religion as Reverend Moon's decades of investment in the reunification of Korea. And finally, what can the women do? Women hold families together and are an important part of the social order. Women, in turn, are traditionally assigned to food processing, meaning cooking, but also food production. As we all know, good cuisine unites nationalities and serves to promote international understanding. With Italian, Greek, Indian, and other ethnic restaurants in many of our countries, we can connect naturally to the other culture and their tradition. Hence my suggestion to create a thematic hub consisting of the components of politics, economy, technology, and society, see as PETS, a foreign policy ecosystem. The team is a cultural asset of the Korean Peninsula, like Argan Oil d'Or in Morocco, created with new technologies and distributed with online sales, as suggested a project by a Women for World Peace for the development of a cultural peace zone in the DMZ. Such a successful project can serve as a tool for rebonding people and a reason to work together. This is my suggestion to you today, and I wish you a very nice evening.
네, 비아트리스 비숍 이사님, 감사합니다.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beatrice. Based on Germany's experience of division and unification, you mentioned the possibility of unification on the Korean Peninsula. From now on, we will have a Q&A session. Since the time is limited, we will only receive 1 or 2 questions per speaker. If you have any questions, please write them on the Q&A box below the screen. And speakers, please answer within 2 minutes per question. If you have any question to Dr. Beatrice Bischof, please leave your email address on the chat box. So first question is to Director Kwon. Question 1. In German unification, it could be seen that cultural and psychological integration was more difficult than political and economical. Through this, we can predict that cultural conflicts will be also arising in the unification of Korea. What was the most helpful for you to overcome cultural differences while living in Korea? Language and communication were the most difficult. Since South Korea uses a lot of foreign words, it was very hard to communicate despite having the same roots and language. It took a lot of time for me to settle down. It was also hard because there wasn't any counseling or education. To overcome this, I think education and hands-on activities are crucial, and learning through volunteer work is important as well. Next question is to Representative Iida Koji. In your speech, you said that the Japanese and the international community are responsible for the division of the Korean Peninsula. But is there anything you want the Koreans from Japan and the Korean Peninsula to do for unification? The Korean War caused by the Cold War between East and the West was right after being released from Japanese colonial rule. This division on the Korea continues to carry across the world. The people are still in a difficult position due to the division of their homeland. The Korean Japanese are still in the process of carving out the history of sadness that has continued to bear a heavy burden on the world. Do you have any wishes from me as a Japanese for Koreans living in Japan and people on the Korean Peninsula? When I was asked, what can we demand from those who have been severely injured by Japanese colonial rule and who have been torn apart by the division caused by the Cold War? I'm sorry, there are many things that we Japanese alone can't do anything about. The non-profit organization Uri Hana is a bridge between the Korea and Japan. It is mainly Japanese people, but many Korean Japanese are helping out. We have so much to learn from Korean Japanese. They love Japan. I also love the north and south of my country. There are Korean Japanese who are like peace ambassadors who have love on the Korean Peninsula and Japan. That is why the power of Korean Japanese is absolutely necessary. I will be grateful if you could share the steps on becoming a bridge on the Korean Peninsula with Japanese people who wish for love and peace for Korean Japanese. As a Japanese person, I became an adopted child of a Korean man in Japan, and my nationality remains Japanese, so that I can easily travel north and south to become a bridge myself as well. Thank you, Representative Iida Koji. Next question is to Teson Chon. Please tell us how we can support Chosun schools. There are many ways to support Chosun schools. Today, I will introduce 3 ways. First, there is a way for people living in Japan to buy kimchi. Chosun schools across the country regularly make and sell kimchi and many other products. Kimchi with the love of mothers who send their children to Chosun schools is much better than the kimchi sold in the market. The revenue from selling kimchi is then linked to the support of Chosun schools. The second method is crowdfunding. This is a way for people outside of Japan to support. Currently, Bukdo Chosun School and Ibaragi Chosun School are conducting crowdfunding. The third method is supported through one of our speakers, Iida Koji's nonprofit organization, Uri Hana. This is also available for overseas people outside of Japan. Currently, the number of Chosun schools is decreasing every year. There are many reasons such as low birth rates and diversification of values, but the biggest reason is Japan's discrimination policy. The number of enrolled students is gradually decreasing due to economic sanctions, TV reports, and hate speech in Chosun schools. When Chosun schools disappear, there will be few places left for ethnicity education. If ethnicity education disappears, Koreans will not be able to live in Japan. Needless to say, I think it will be far from reunification between the two Koreas. So please support Chosun schools.
네, 정태성님 감사합니다.
Thank you so much for your answer. Yes, we received a lot of questions, but due to the time limit, the Q&A session will be ended here. So if you send us an email, then we will try to send you back the answers. Sadly, we are coming close to the end of today's webinar. We will have Harry Moon, the president of WFWF Korea Subregion 2, give a closing remark. 안녕하세요. Nice to meet you. I'm Margie Moon, president of the WFWP in the West, Central, and Mid-Eastern part of Korea. Our dear international president of WFWP, Dr. Julia Moon, Korean, Japanese, and American panelists, and all women leaders from different walks of life. How are you doing today? Many people have joined us. Thank you. Today's second GWPN webinar theme is Unified Korea, Rising Above Challenges. There are times of life when we face challenges and difficulties that seem insurmountable. Through the personal experiences of today's panelists, we've listened carefully to how they overcame the trials and tribulations of life. Director Ryu Youn Kwon said, "I wanted to live like a human being. My life without freedom and hope must find the path of freedom." With that feeling, she finally stepped on the land of her hometown, the land her parents missed. However, the life she imagined in South Korea was not as easy as she had thought. She did not know that the wall of culture and language was tremendous. In order to overcome such differences, she changed her perspectives of the world, learned her own lessons, and went to college and succeeded as a reliable mother without anyone ignoring her. She overcame many challenges and difficulties until the day she established the after-school Kunsem. Now she's working harder than anyone else to educate teenage and other North Korean defectors and the children of the North Korean defectors. She said she learned that if she could overcome her difficulties, she would be able to overcome anything. It was a really touching story. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Representative Iida Koji mentioned he was a professional boxer in his 20s and fought in the ring with South North Korean unification engraved on his pants with a desire for unification on Korean Peninsula. However, even though his adoptive father suffered a lot from being falsely accused of spying for 40 years, the first word his adoptive father said when he was acquitted in 2020 was "Hooray to Korea." Although he was betrayed by his country, he didn't hold a grudge and instead decided to devote the rest of his life to improving the unification of his country and the relationship between Korea and Japan. After seeing his father overcoming his hardships, Representative Koji has also been determined to devote his life to work hard for the unification of Korea. You're really a respectful person. Thank you. Today, we also heard the pain that Teson Chon experienced when he was a student at Chosun School. Chosun School students are those who purely want the unification of Korea, but having sticking shadows of discrimination. Mr. Chon mentioned that he was often abused or bullied by a Japanese adult on the subway or bus on his way back to school. It is a very unfortunate reality. The prejudice and criticism Chosun school students received from the Japanese cannot be said in words. Despite such pain, Mr. Chun thinks that the closest being to peace on the Korean Peninsula and Japan are Chosun school students. He said that the students are living hard to become a bridge of peace that connects the three countries, and the unification of the two Koreas is essential for them to live proudly. Thank you, Mr. Chun. And lastly, Dr. Beatrice Bischof gave her speech as a person who has experienced the division of Germany for 40 years. Dr. Bischof said that sudden unification should be avoided and that the way forward is to gradually establish peace. This is not only about integration nationally, but also local environments in the long term. Steps in this direction include economic cooperation in special economic zones and military trust building. Dr. Bischof also mentioned that this would be an establishment of a country that recreates a new national identity and integration with the Asia-Pacific region. She also suggests that role of women. Women unite their families and say that they are an important part of social order. She said that good cooking plays a role in integrating nationality and promoting international understanding. Thank you, Dr. Bischof. The founder of the WFWP, Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon, is constantly committed to bringing a peace unification of Korea. Until now, she has the same hope for the future. There was a time when Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon said, "To create a world full of true peace and love, I will devote the rest of my life to ending war, immorality, greed, and liberating God's heart. It is a big dream. It will take a lot of effort and prayer to get there. Even if the goal sounds too ambitious, we all agree to the hope of mankind to live in peace and harmony." Today, the second GWPN Forum for the Unification of Korea ended successfully. There is a saying that a great thing comes from a small beginning. I hope there will be a big change as we continue to speak out. I think if we believe in ourselves and overcome our challenges, we will be able to grow internal strength to fight bigger challenges. I sincerely thank the leaders, panelists, members, and staff centered on our International President, Dr. Julia Moon, for your hard work. Above all, I thank our audiences online for being with us from beginning to end. You can look forward to our third webinar, and I hope to see you again then. I wish everyone to be happy and healthy. Thank you.
문혜림 회장님 폐회사 감사드립니다. 오늘의 모든
Thank you so much, President Moon.
앞으로 우리가 나아갈 방향성에 대해서도 언급해 주셨습니다.
Summarized up all the speeches and gave us the
스피치를 해주신 4명의 스피커분들 진심으로 감사드립니다. 웨비나를 준비하기 위해 수고해주신
today we will not
회장님, 안게리카 슬렉 미국 회장님, 문혜린 한국 경기 강원권 회장님, 그리고 통역사분들, 스태프 여러분들께도 감사를 드립니다. 네, 그리고 세계 각
I would also like to thank Dr. Julia Moon, International President of WFWP, Marjorie Moon, President of Angelica Sully, President of WFWP USA, translators, and the staff for their hard work in preparing this webinar. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to all the participants who attended from all over the world. Although we have different perspectives, I felt that all the speakers were eagerly hoping for the unification of Korea. Each speech today was something we could rarely hear. With the valuable testimonies, we were able to know the hardships and difficulties of North Korean defectors and Korean-Japanese people that we did not know about. Above all, we were able to know our passion for unification on Korea. Today's main goal of the webinar is how women contribute to reconciliation and peace. GWPN keywords promoted by the WFWP are love, service, and sacrifice. All of these keywords symbolize mother's love. It is difficult to achieve peace in the world of war, violence, oppression, exploitation, and crimes led by men on this land. It is the women of this era who will end this type of world and realize an ideal world full of peace, love, and freedom. Reconciliation and unification between the two Koreas can only be achieved when the natures of women are combined. Reconciliation and unification between two Koreas are difficult to achieve with the approach of the older generations. It is when combining the nature of women that can make the impossible possible. There is an announcement. I posted a notice on chat box about the 1% Our Family Love Sharing Project and Chosen School Support. We ask for your cooperation. Also, I posted a survey and a link for reflections on today's speeches. And when the webinar is over, please fill out a survey when we send through email so that we can move in a better direction. Lastly, I'd like to show you a 1 minute and 30 seconds video of the International Sister Partnership. Please watch it until the end. Before that, let me introduce our International Sister Partnership. International Sister Partnership is a peace movement that goes beyond the difference between nationality, ethnicity, and religion. It is the first step in mutual understanding in which women come together for peace. The history of the WFWP began with sister partnership activities. The vision of this activity is to make Korean Japanese women who have enemy relationship to become sisters and families who can embrace each other with love beyond past history. Since the launch of the Korea-Japan Sister Partnership Movement in 1994, it has spread around the world. Today, more than 100 countries have attended, and there are more than 180,000 participants, including leaders from many parts of the world. When I was a student, I attended an international sister partnership as an interpreter. I witnessed Korean and Japanese women who are in an enemy relationship being formed as sisters. I saw them hugging and welcoming each other in tears, despite the language barrier. We have seen many cases of practical exchanges, such as contact information and showing one another their family pictures. Reconciliation is by no means difficult. Reconciliation begins the moment we open our heart when we open our hearts and accept others. I hope those who attended the webinar today will attend this activity of WFWP and become witnesses at the moment of miraculous reconciliations. I uploaded another sister partnership video made in Korean and Japan on chat box. We would appreciate it if you can watch it when you have time. Then this is the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much for participating today. Everyone stay healthy. Thank you so much.
Women's Federation for World Peace initiated the Bridge of Peace ceremony as a way to give women and mothers the opportunity to become true sisters and friends beyond race, religion, or nationality. The co-founders of Women's Federation have been living a lifestyle of loving and forgiving their enemies. Inspired by their example, the Bridge of Peace was introduced in 1994 as a tool of reconciliation and healing. Since then, tens of thousands have participated in the Middle East, Asia, Europe, Africa, South America, Canada, and the US. By embracing the other on the bridge, participants begin to heal not only wounds of the present, but also wounds of the past, and ultimately heal themselves.
I thank Father Sun Myung Moon and Mother Hak Ja Moon for their vision, because it's truly been realized today as so many of us with differences met at the bridge, embraced, and walked across the bridge together.
Today, we invite you all to participate in this healing process and to be a bridge of peace and love.